Again. Emil Catholic here with FantasyNation.com. We have a true fantasy pioneer today who started his career in the mid-1990s in his garage. Very honored to introduce William Del Pilar. William, how you doing?
Hanging in there, Emo. It's good to hear your voice, and it's always good to talk fantasy sports shop.
Yes, we're going to have fun. So, tell me about when you were young. Did you watch the NFL?
Oh my gosh, I was a small kid in Panama. Us Latinos don't grow too big normally, but I was always fascinated with American football. And every Sunday, that's what I would watch. Eventually, as a kid, I discovered Pro Football Weekly, and that gave me my fill of content. But it was always disappointing because Pro Football Weekly was a weekly magazine, so you'd only get that data once a week. You had to wait. So as most fantasy dinosaurs did back then, we lived through USA Today and their Wednesday and Thursday player news and their stat boxes.
Yeah, exactly. So when did you find out about fantasy football?
Oh gosh, I want to say in 1990 I was in the Navy. And it's kind of hard to play in the Navy because when you get sent away, getting the results is difficult. But we managed to do that. There was a group of us, started a league. And from there, I discovered the magazines, Krause magazines at the time. In fact, the first two magazines I picked up for my first two drafts, because I was asked to play the day of the draft, was your magazine, Pro Football Forecast, and Krause's, and I can't remember the name of their magazine. It was the same magazine. They did baseball, football, so maybe fantasy football. But those were the two magazines, and I don't remember which one. But I remember there was Terry Allen and then Brian Mitchell, I want to say. On paper, they were relatively equal that year, and I went with Terry Allen. And, lo and behold, every time he tore his ACL, the following year he'd come back with double-digit number, and it was a fantastic pick. And I also picked Steve Young because everybody said, oh, Joe Montana's coming back from the back surgery. I was like, he's done. He's toast. And sure enough, I did not win that league. It was a basic TD. So all the strengths I drafted for did not really apply. You really needed – Marion Butts was a stud that year, if I remember correctly. But, yeah, so I'm throwing some names out there. But that was the first time I played, and then I just fell in love with it. And going to college after the Navy, it was 1996 frame. And my wife, and I was still playing. My wife actually kind of hollered at me from the living room because, I was spending more time with fantasy than my wife. And she said, why don't you figure out a way to make some damn money doing that? And honest to God, Emo, the flag just went up. And I was like, oh, my gosh. Because prior to that, I had seen a few of the early fantasy football sites, and call it arrogance, cockiness, or whatever. I was like, oh, my gosh, I can do 10 times better. And then so I approached some individuals, Ryan Bonini, who's still in the industry, and a couple of other individuals who did not last too long. They got burnt out from the work. And we formed KFFL. KFFL actually stood for, if I'm correct, Kiwani Fantasy Football League. And it was Ryan Bonini's local fantasy league. But what today's internet player does not realize, and you probably remember, is back in the mid-'90s, if a website had been in existence for even 2 to 3 years, it was considered an experienced website you could trust and go to because, the internet was so new, commercially speaking. So because of that, we kept the name KFFL. And from there, again, call it arrogance. But I believe we were one of the most dominant fantasy football sites around. We were ranked in the low 2000s in terms of global audience. We were we had contracts with literally every major sports site out there with our player news or in the Yahoo case, providing them premium content. So we were that small company, didn't have the personalities. We never focused on person as much as grinding the content out, grinding the player news. And I remember Bob Harris, your guy Bob, beloved Bob. We all love Bob. One day over the phone, he told me, he goes, William, you just can't keep that pace up in terms of the hot off the wire, because back then nothing was automated. So, reading everything was done in a dinosaur, step by step by step. So the process, technologically speaking, was not as easy back then as it was today. but that's why we got the contracts. For every other player news site that would post 25 to 50 notes a day on their good day, we were blowing out a few hundred. If that water boy tripped on the 50-yard line, we were posting that. And then that emboldened us to the agents, to the general managers. We started getting phone calls from agents, meeting general managers who kept asking us, how do you do it? And we were just a grinding machine, reading the newspapers, developing and building out a reporter in every locker room. In fact, I don't know this as in terms of the data out there, but where we were at the time we started, I believe we were the first fantasy sports site to have an NFL reporter in every locker room.
Wow. So you got a lot of, so they called you on the phone, you talked to them on the phone a lot back in those days, or email?
Yes. And what we quickly realized, and forgive me to the writers that we actually loved and were great writers, we quickly realized that the writers had their biases inherently built in, whether they liked a certain player, liked a certain coach, didn't like a coach. So our first issue that we realized is we got to get the bias out. Then we were thinking of hiring some under the table as freelancers to write for us. And then we started studying their articles, and we saw there wasn't much data in the articles. And, fantasy football individuals were data. So what we did is we created reports, and we just sent them the templates. And Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, they would right after practice, they would feed us these reports. So, and this was an era back then where there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook, there was no social media. So when the news would come out, we'd get it first. And I'd say about 80% of the time, the writer would tell us, you cannot post this till after this time frame, because they wanted it. They wanted their own website to have it, but their website wouldn't be updated. The newspapers were operating just like they did before the internet, during the internet. Well, we don't publish till 5 p.m. We're not releasing that breaking news until 5 p.m. So I remember the Fred Lane story. Everybody remembers the tragic story of Fred Lane, the running back for the Carolina Panthers. We could have literally broken that story nationwide, and technically we did, but it came from the Charlotte Observer. We got the story of his death right a couple of minutes after it had happened, but we did not run with it to honor the Charlotte Observer's reporter who had informed us. But that's how it went. And then we did get some insiders who started feeding us, because they saw, in fact, and I won't say their names, they asked me to 20 years ago, and I'll still respect that today. But they said, William, the problem we insiders have is the simple fact that so-called insiders are stealing our scoops and claiming it as theirs. And I remember NFL Talk was one of the worst. And I think one of their guys has graduated to NBC News, Mike Florio. And that's what they would do. They would get a press release that would say it was inside news, or they just go grab it from another site and say it was inside news, where we would source where we got it from. And that endeared us to all the reporters. That endeared us to the general managers, the insiders, because they knew we weren't making things up.
Wow. That's a great story. I didn't know all the detail. You can't see my screen because of technical difficulties, but right now I'm putting up the KFFL.com site from May 28th, 1996. You'll see
in the
video. And it's pretty basic. It's pretty basic. And also it has Mastermind on the bottom. So I guess you were working with Mastermind even back in 96.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a soap opera drama. And Mike Nazareth, bless his heart, is still out there today pumping. So kudos for him. But, there were a lot of egos starting any small startup up. Everybody has their 2 cents. I actually lost every single internal battle partners. But every time I lost, I would come back and say, well, okay, we'll do it your way. But if your way doesn't work, let's do it my way. And within 3-4 years, I had a majority ownership, and I was running the company because their ways failed. Because my advice to people starting up a business, never shirk on 3 issues. You need a lawyer. Get a lawyer. For us, the internet was a brand new medium from the perspective that new rules, new regulations. It was a wild, wild west. So I wanted to make sure we were legally sound. And the other thing is get an accountant. Make sure your accountant's there and they're doing your taxes properly, and get a bookkeeper. Those are the 3 things that I always tell people invest in, because that's the grind of a business. Everybody says they want to find the job they love in life to do. Well, you're never going to find a job you love 100% Every job has a grinding aspect to it that we don't like. And in every business you have what I just mentioned, and those are things that people tend not to realize how important it is, and they tend to do it themselves, and they screw up along the way, or it takes up 5 hours here that focus on actually working and building the business.
So how, you had Bonini, you had Michael Nazarek, you had a couple other people. How did you meet these people? Did you know them before you started the business?
No, that was the ignorance or naivety of youth. We all knew each other because we all loved fantasy football, and over a period we got to know one another. And then I eventually, when the better half said, figure out a way to make money, I sat there and approached these individuals, and Michael Nazarek was not part of the original group, even though we had this with him. He had his established site, so he brought a lot of that with him, and we had some conflict because of that, because of what we wanted to do. So he went his own way towards his own success. And then there was myself, Ryan, and 2 other individuals, and that was every night we come together for the chat. Ryan Bonini had actually one of the first chat programs on the internet. And so that immediately drew people to the website every night. So we kind of got started building our names and ourselves through the chats. And,
wow.
And from there we started, we kept the site as it was. And for about 6 to 8 months, we built a back-end site. And it's funny what you say is our site was very simple looking. And that's because, the internet was brand new. Ryan did the bulk of the work. I eventually learned how to do HTML, and we built our sites by hand. And I remember the same thing. I still remember to this day, you guys were the individuals who did it technically different because you used Code Fusion, whereas everybody else was using whatever the norm was back then. So the site did have simplistic looking. Look and feel to it, but it worked.
I wasn't being mean. It's just the 96. You should have seen my site in 96. It's pretty embarrassing. When did you go database where you could put stories in, and they'd pop up on the system? Do you remember?
I want to say about 2002 was when our same overloaded. Here's something interesting too for young entrepreneurs. I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist today, these problems, but we were on a local regional in Bumbleep, Egypt, and they were great, the Upers, So early on, because of Ryan's early site, there wasn't a lot of traffic. And then when I created Hot Off the Wire and the Player News, our traffic blew up. Right before that point, we were more of a brochure site. Our chat program got traffic, but nothing extravagant. And so they locked us into a 5-year contract at an extremely, extremely low number. And the day after, like within a week or two, nobody could get on our site. It dropped to a crawl. So approximately every 3 to 6 months, we were literally rebuilding our servers, getting new contracts. I don't know how it's done today in that sense. You have rack space and all that, and that's really not a problem. But back then, we were consistently overloading our servers. And it's funny because we were paying maybe $1,200 a month. At the 5-year mark, the day that contract ended, the following month, our bandwidth cost jumped to like $12,000. So they exactly. So they were just dying to get us off that contract, and we were like, oh gosh, can we stay in business? Having to increase our budget by $12,000 a month. And I'm rounding out the numbers; they fluctuated a little different. But those are the fun days. Those are the Wild West days. And I won't get into some of the other stuff, being young and dumb, and party animals, so we joke about it that if we wrote our 5 to 7 year story out, our 10-year story out, it would be a movie, of a lot of partying, a lot of hard work, a lot of arguments, Emo, I was never a cliquish person. So when going to the seminars, it was always about business. It's when you and I first met, it's ironic because us our shot. And for all you individuals starting out today, who may not realize it, Emo gave a lot of us our shot in terms of writing for your magazines. And Emo, you were an astute businessman, a lot of bartering, a lot of trading, a lot of ad space giving, and you made it work, but it was a true win-win. And we kind of look forward to all that. You know, I do want to tell you one story, though, about people swiping stories and the insiders claiming to be insiders. And I've told you this story before, but what makes it fun is it's so fantasy-based. So back then, teams did not post free agents. The NFL did not post free agents. You had to accumulate that through press releases, news reports, who was free agents. And one of the partners, that was his passion. He just loved researching. So we got about 98% of all the free agent lists, and just through that process, then calling agents. We were the only company, fantasy sports company, that list. So we posted that list up, on the website. And a lot of well-known fantasy sites, in fact, a few that still exist today, they literally just stole it. We got so livid. So I said, screw this. So we did a fullback, and there was a fullback from the 90s. Help me out, Emo. His name was Christian. I want to say Bob Christian or something like that. Fullback for the Atlanta Falcons or something Christian.
Yeah.
And so we created our own something Christian, and he was a fullback for the Carolina Panthers. And that's how we caught everybody. Bam, 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 bam. We just saw it all going up. We saw Bob Christian, the fullback Carolina Panthers. And all we did email. And 90% of the companies did not respond to us. We saw that Christensen was the leader from the Carolina Panthers, but it showed us who were legitimate players within the industry and who were the hanger-ons. The hanger-ons meaning people just stealing content, creating a fake content. When I say fake content, writing whatever they want without really researching the data. But it was really a bad issue because we did hot off the wire in the player news, and a lot of these news sites started copying and started pulling our player news and sourcing it as their own. But the good thing was, going to the seminars, you met individuals, you met other companies, and they got to know you, and they knew what was happening. So they knew that for a legitimate contract and legitimate news source, they came to us. And Emo, at one time, we had Yahoo, CBS, NFL, like My Fantasy League, RT Sports. We had literally every major player, Fox Sports, providing content to. Wow. That's what I was most proud of. Was that I was able to divest the company or into three sections: business to consumer in terms of our subscriptions, and advertising a revenue stream, as well as a business to business revenue stream. Because I ran the company scared, meaning the fear of not being able to produce, the fear of not being able to pay my employees. So one way to do that was by diversifying how we generated revenue, kind of like what you've done with the website and the magazines. In fact, when Katrina hit, because we also were one of the pioneers in being able to use data from the internet, and we used web trends to gather all that data. I knew once Katrina hit that we had to make up approximately 15 to 18%. So I told the company 20%. We got to make up 20%. These people don't care about fantasy sports right now. They care about their lives and livelihood. So being able to use technology, even though we were a garage organization, we funneled all our money into the technology. And right around 2002 is when we went to MySQL, and we had the site. That was when we had to have the site redone from a professional company. That killed us because Ryan and I had everything done ourselves with the old-fashioned HTML. We were always in the top page, somewhere on page 1. And when we had that done, they destroyed our SEO, and we had to rebuild that. And that took a good number of years, like approximately 5 years to get back up in those spots.
That's very impressive. By the way, a story. Let's see if you remember. We were at the FSTA about 2001. We went to watch the Chicago Bears.
Yes.
And there was a handful of us, and in our little area, it was you, I, and I think it was Adam Kaplan. I can't remember. There was a guy sitting in front of us. He had a Miami Dolphins shirt on. Do you remember that?
Oh, I've never forgotten that story. And that's one of the stories I love to tell in terms of how fantasy overtook the NFL.
Okay, so we're looking at this guy, and we're trying to, who the hell is this guy? And finally, I think it was Adam goes, "Hey, you work for Miami?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm Rick Spillman." And Adam
actually
says, well,
Adam knew him.
Oh, okay. So Adam says, "Well, I'm in fantasy," and the guys, "Oh, that's great." And you said, "Yeah, I do the what's the name of your thing again? I forgot."
KFFL.
The hot
I
off the
said
wire.
I'm William.
Oh, I'm William. I'm with KFFL to do a hot off the wire. He goes, oh my God, I read that every day. And Adam just sunk in his chair.
Yeah. Well, see, Adam was, again, Adam was just protective of his sources, of his contacts. And remember, Adam got his start through fantasy, but Adam wanted to be an NFL insider, which is what he became.
Yeah.
He used fantasy sports to make that leap,
Yeah.
And I love Adam, bless his heart, but that kind of irked me because I'm like, hey, we are legitimate people. And the reason I say we are a legitimate organization in the sports world is reporting. I quickly realized, going back to the reporters, is they wrote a lot without much data. We wrote data. So I would always challenge anybody. You put a reporter on the panel, you put a fantasy sports writer on the panel. And I guarantee you, 6 months later, our data will be spot on. That reporter will be all over the place because you cannot go by feelings when you're talking fantasy sports and how it's data driven. People used to tell me, well, if data is so strong, how come you can't get everything? I said, well, the easy answer is there is one component that no fantasy analyst or every fantasy analyst struggles with, and that is heart. You cannot put heart into numbers. And with the NFL, MLB, whatever sport, we all know there are players out there with Michael Jordan talent, with Joe Montana talent, but they end up, becoming nobodies because they don't have the heart to maximize that talent, or they get their first big contract and get lost in the money for what reason. So understanding what players have heart and what players don't is extremely important, and that's how we would focus. That's why when we talk to insiders, when we talk to reporters, some of them will find it odd that we'd be asking about the personalities. What kind of person are they? What's their outlook on life? Because that helped us determine what kind of player this could be on the field. We knew LT would be a stud. We knew Larry Johnson would eventually be a flash. We had mixed issues on Priest Holmes because we knew he had the heart, but we weren't sure he had the skill, which brings up another story, Emil, about data and how it can be so spot on, but you still don't listen to it. Priest Holmes' first year in Kansas City, if I'm correct, that was so long ago. In fact, this was the late 90s. I crunched his numbers. I did everything. And I actually called Ryan to sit down. By then it was Ryan and I running the show. And I said, dude, look at these numbers. And I showed him my numbers. And he was like, no way. I said, I've crunched them. I re-crunched them. And I crunched them over and over. This is what comes out. And we lacked the cojones to run with those numbers. So we dropped them, not by much, but we dropped them kind of like to put them more in line. And I'll be damned if at the end of the season, Priest Holmes hit those numbers we had projected.
Wow.
And after that point, we always followed our numbers. And I always told our guys, we're going to be wrong, but it won't be for lack of trying. It won't be for a bias. It'll be because that's just how the world works. So we were pretty good at our job, and we did it the old-fashioned way, pencil and paper, and algorithms in today's world, they crunch the numbers. But the problem with them is, they don't accentuate the nuances of every player. And that's why even with the algorithms, it's important, I believe, to have a human person looking at player, every number, and see what kind of like, okay, this is following the algorithm, but this player has this, or there's a new offensive coordinator or whatnot. And I'm not sure how many fantasy individuals do that today.
Yeah, I remember David Johnson in preseason, and of course preseason is really difficult to judge people, but I remember seeing him run a couple plays, and he was so smooth and fast, and he just juked people. He just whatever it's called when you push your arm out. And I just watched that guy. Oh my God, this guy's got some talent. And it's preseason. You got to be careful who they're playing against. But it turned out I was right. It's sometimes you got to see it too.
Yeah. He has the Steve Young syndrome, though, towards the end of Steve Young's career. It's like, how many games will he last before he goes down to injury?
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting this year because, he failed last year and he got traded to Houston. So is he going to be himself again, or is he going to be a small part of himself? That's going to be an interesting. What do you think?
I'll be quite honest, Emo. As you know, I've been politically bound, and this is a confession I make. I follow sports still, but as far as following the individuals that closely, I no longer do that. But David Johnson is such a name brand in terms of players. My issue with him is just injury. If he stays healthy, he'll be productive. And the fact that O'Brien runs I assume he's still running the quasi New England offense. It's an offense that adapts to the strength of the player. Remember Steve Sladen, smallest player. I may be reaching, but similar. I don't want to say running styles, but in terms of they're smaller, they're faster, they can catch the ball. So, and the Texans even back then adapted to his strength. So, if David Johnson could stay healthy, there's a sleeper pick that you can draft. I'm speculating now. Maybe as a second or third running back who could put up number one fantasy running back numbers, at least in a PPR league. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. And right now, watching the ADP, he's being drafted a little higher than you would think. People are so he's not too much of a sleeper right now. Now, 2 years after he started his business, 1998, there was a fantasy sports convention in the Tropicana Hotel in Vegas. Were you there?
1990. Yes, I was, and it was you, myself, Scott Higgins. That's where the dinosaurs got together. That's why I can walk into a room and not having seen anybody say in 10 years, and we pick up as if nothing ever changed because we were the nucleus of the industry, and I'm pretty proud of that. And Scott Higgins actually was a force early on in keeping people's hopes and dreams alive because nobody was making money. And I remember being there the night before, and we all saw this coming. When they promoted that event, what was it, 5,000 or 10,000? And then as each closest week got to it, the numbers kind of lessened to the night before. We're hoping through just traffic alone, we'll get 500 to 1,000 people here. And that whole weekend we saw, and nobody really knows, but I've heard numbers from 50 to 200 people walk through there, but despite the colossal failure of that event in terms of its purpose to draw fans, we bonded as a association, and because we all bonded so well and so closely, I think that was a reason that the association was able to successfully launch and to get enough revenue from all the companies. Because remember, I was working out of the garage, a couple others, we were in debt. But yet we still provided our dues and made sure we were part of it. And I believe in individuals such as yourself, Scott Higgins, Rick Wolf, because he was with CBS Sportsline at the time, and especially Yahoo, because they were on board with what we were trying to do. I believe that's why we were able to be as successful as we were. And people don't understand back then, gambling, because of the internet, the gambling, everybody was taking gambling ads. And we all knew that was eventually a death knell because gambling was illegal. And sure enough, that happened. But it also brought in enough revenue for some of us to survive and to be able to contribute because we had to get a carve-out. Remember the carve-out? I'm speculating, but that cost us thousands of dollars to get, what was his name? David Safani or something. Oh, my gosh. And he kind of led the battle because John Kyle in Arizona, a new senator, was trying to make a name for himself by taking fantasy sports down. And we won that battle. And that battle eventually was the downfall, I believe, of the true nature of what fantasy sports is and what allowed daily fantasy to come in, which is gambling. And I lost a lot. I did not lose any friends, but I was on the other side of the aisle in terms of how we saw that. Well, it's a game of skill. Yes, it is. Poker's a game of skill. But the difference in traditional fantasy is I will spend $100 to win $10 because we're in it for the bragging rights. It's a different mentality. And any industry where you have to start the game by having a deposit, that's gambling. But it's here to stay. It's where the money is at. So I saw that company. I saw that coming. So I grudgingly accepted that. My issue was the two faces of individuals in the industry trying to make it be something it was not. It was gambling. They used our carve-out to create an industry.
Yeah, by the way, the Fantasy Sports Trade Association is now the Fantasy Sports and Gambling Association, just to let you know. Of course, now gambling.
Oh, no. I still follow that. And, yeah, I see that. And, again, I grudgingly accepted it because it was the will of the people. It was another tax bill, whatever you want to call it, which is why years ago I purchased dailyfantasy.com because I did see the future. And I guess the other thing I would tell young entrepreneurs is understand these words of wisdom. Learn how to run your business and not always work your business. Because when you're working your business, you at times aren't running it. And the people who learn how to distinguish that are the ones who tend to sell their companies or grow it into much bigger mid-sized companies to where, they have 10, 20, 30 employees into true mid-level companies. And I think that's continues to happen today. Companies come and go because they don't have that vision or that understanding. Their leaders, and they don't know when it's time to bring an outsider in to help them run it versus them doing it alone.
Yeah. Well, another thing, going back to the Tropicana conference, the nice thing about it, it actually started the trade association because a bunch of people got together and had a meeting at that, and I think that they all we started developing it, and Greg Ambrosius took that over and led that. And so that was kind of special.
Right.
It was kind of a special event. Now back to your company. As you guys evolved, you eventually sold out. Can you tell us how that evolution took place?
Well, it sounds so ugly the way you say it. Sold out. Well, yes, we did. I know. I'm just giving you a hard time, Emo. For everybody to know, I view Emo as one of the industry's mentors. Everybody says, yeah, this person helped mentor me. This person helped mentor me. Emo Kavlik was a mentor to the industry. And people may not realize you and I go back to day one. And I do remember the Tropicana in regards to that. That was the nucleus because immediately that's one of the things that came out. We all bonded and the trade association was talked about. And the good thing about the trade association is they included everybody. Because early on, I do remember some of the conversations, they didn't want to include smaller companies such as ourselves. And it was Scott Higgins, if I remember correctly, and even we said, no, we are an industry or something like that. And that was a minor issue, but I do remember hearing that conversation. And the Tropicana was a lot of fun. Some of the companies, people don't realize EA Sports had a fantasy presence. Krause was there. My Fantasy League with Kevin Austin was there. Fantasy Insight. So it was a lot of small companies mixed in with a lot of the other companies. CBS Sports Line, Yahoo were the two big wigs there. And fast forward 6 months, 8 months to Krause's fantasy show that you and I were at. We were right next to you. Who was walking around giving hell to everybody? You remember that one? It was at the Indian Casino.
NFL Players Association. It was in Chicago. That was a lot of fun. As a matter of fact, you and I were right next to each other, and you were running contests then. I don't remember what year that was, but it may have been the same year that we went to the Bears. I can't remember. Anyway, she was walking around, and she walked up to your booth, and you were explaining what you did. You didn't really know who she was, and you said, she asked you if you run leagues or something. So, yeah, I run some leagues, and then she just pounded on you, and said, you're going to have to get licensed. And I forget exactly what happened, but allegedly we all went to Greg and said, hey, come on, man. And then they took her out of there. But it took a while to go ahead. I'm sorry. Let me tell you what you were
doing. Yes, that is exactly what happened, because you were there with Bill Robertson, and she was going around, and everybody was crumbling. They were kind of like listening to her spiel, taking her abuse, and then thank God she left. And I was the first one like, oh, screw you, lady. You can go to hell. And then you were like, and it was Bill, and we were like, yeah. So we went to Greg, and we're like, well, what do you want me to do? I said, get her the hell out of here. She's hurting business. We paid good money not to be harassed. And they got rid of her. And for about a month, for maybe 6 months, we kept receiving the certified letter, you are to stop and desist, mm-hmm. and that's what today's entrepreneur does not realize about us dinosaurs and pioneers. We cleared the way for all that. We are the industry, and thank goodness for Charlie Weger. I'm saying we're the industry, but it was Charlie Weger having the strength and the courage to go, you're not going to license us at Major League Baseball, we're suing you. And that was a domino effect.
Well, it was pretty much he's out of business, so you might as well sue him. On top of that, we spent, the trade association spent about $40,000 on an amicus brief to help the lawsuit. And the things that we didn't really know then that I found out later is there was a lawsuit with one of the cell phone companies that was doing live real-time stats on NBA games, and they got sued by NBA or whatever, BAM or whatever, and they won the suit because the judge said as soon as the play is over, it's historical data, and historical data is public domain. So not only were they able to post the stats, they could do real time, because it's not really real time, it's right after the play. And that, I'm sure that lawsuit helped us and Charlie Wiegert win that lawsuit, and it was a great lawsuit because it freed us to just being able to run businesses.
Right, and what people don't realize about that lawsuit and what was so accurate and helped us win was that, you know, these leagues, they've thrown a lot of lawsuits at individuals and companies, and they had so many contradictions, and one of them was a cell phone. And I remember specifically, I can't remember, it wasn't Glenn, it was the actual lawyer that Charlie had hired, and I remember that guy belongs in the Hall of Fame too, and I don't think he's in there. He's the one who actually spearheaded that. But he sat there and said, he was telling us, remember that the judge looked at the other side, you know, the leagues, and go, so what you're saying is, if I'm in your backyard and the Knicks have just scored a basket and my neighbor calls, or you know, hey, what's the score? And I tell him 78-76. I owe you money. Well, Your Honor, we wouldn't take it that far. Now, he goes, that's what you are trying to defend, is your right. And from there, it went downhill for the leagues. What happened, you know, and what the industry may not realize is the leagues screwed themselves. Because we weren't, but the Charlie Wiegerts and the mid-sized companies, they were all paying not their fair share. They were paying the mob, i.e. the leagues, money to become licensed, and the leagues got greedy and they wanted it all. So with that quiet, happy medium where the leagues claimed this, we claimed this, there were some companies paying them, they got too greedy. So instead of keeping that status quo, they went for the jugular and found out that, hey, we can hit back harder. And that's what happened.
And I don't know if you remember, but I forget Lisa Ann, I forget her name. Anyway, that lady.
LaShawn.
Yeah. And what she actually came out and said is, we want to get rid of all you and just have 2 or 3 companies. And I think they think that way is, you know, they just want a couple of companies that they can, you know, feed off of, and then they have 100% of all the fantasy content business, and that was their goal, which really disappointed me, because, you know, you're thinking, wow, the NFL should be nice to us. We help people watch the games, but they had a real, you know, aggressive approach to business, and luckily they lost that, because it would have been really devastating. Yeah. Now, it didn't devastate me as much because I had magazines at the time and I didn't have any contests, but it would definitely be a problem. And God, I had another thing I was going to say. I can't remember what it is, but I'll think of it in a minute. But yeah, it was a crazy time, and I'm glad we got through that. And it was nuts. So tell me more about, as you progressed, you had a chance to sell your company.
Okay, that's right. So I knew at the my belief was always that about the 10-year mark, the big wigs would realize, hey, we can make money from this, and they would start cutting into our numbers. And what made us nice, and I talked to John Hanson. John Hanson is another dinosaur who I don't think is in the Trade Association's Hall of Fame. And let me say this about that. You know, KFFL people, Hanson belongs in there. We belong there, a few others. And one of my disappointments over the last 10, 15 years of the industry is it kind of became cliquish. When we all got together, it was still cliquish. And it was a situation, though, we all bonded, and it overcame the cliquishness. So whereas I wouldn't hang out with certain people, we all respected one another. So it seems to have become a bit more cliquish, a bit more business-like, because it's just exponentially grown. But get what LaShawn said real quick before I talk about the sale of the company. It's funny you say that because, you know, what people don't know is the first 3 years of the Fantasy Trade Association, there were only 30 companies going to these meetings. So what would happen is right after on a Saturday night, we'd all go to the bar, wherever it was, you know, and that's kind of where we bonded. And we, you know, I'm a lightweight, so yeah. Most of us were kind of blasted at the time, but I always wait to get blasted because I was always pulling information. And I remember there was this one guy from one of the Yahoo type conglomerates. And in a drunken stupor, he sat there and said, you know, William, we love you, but all we're doing is we're watching your site, and we're just going to do everything what you do, and we're going to do it better because I got the millions. We have the multi-millions in investment dollars, and we can exponentially do it much better and faster, and we're going to drive you out of business. He wasn't stating that as a mean, vile thing. He was talking in terms of a factual. That's how they kind of view the going. And so when LaShawn made those comments, she made those comments all the time early on. That was her goal. It made me always recall that conversation, because you're correct. Because that's what surprised me, at the fact that some of these conglomerates were helping us still. And I believe they were helping us because they were there from day one. We had those ties. I think once if people who had not gone to those early trade association meetings would have taken over, then they would have just aligned with the league and just completely cut us off. But that didn't happen. But you're so right. And thank goodness that failed. So getting back to that thought process, I always believed about the 10-year mark, the ESPNs, the Yahoos would develop their own content. Everything would start to settle in. And we were grinders, Emo. To Yahoo, after selling the company, I sat there and talked to a couple of guys there. I go, hey, out of curiosity, how big did you think we were? He goes, dude, we assumed you were about 20, 25 people working at our offices based on the content you were producing. And we were 5 people in the office, and we had freelance writers, but we were grinding out about more than enough content to feed multi-businesses, customized content, and still do our own work. So we were operating with about 10 of us, operating as if we were 25, 30 people. So we were grinding it out, and we could not keep that pace up. And we've been doing it for 10 years. I was getting burnt out. Ryan was getting burnt out. Those final 2 years, I always enjoyed and loved fantasy football, but about week 6, week 7, I'm like, oh God, the season can't end soon enough. Not because I didn't like it, but because of the grind of the content we were putting out. So I sent Andrew Langer. Andrew Langer handled our marketing. And I sent him to New York. I could not go to one of the seminars or something to that matter, or some kind of business. Oh, it was the other company. Remember when another association sprung up? It was done by Clay Walker and a couple other people?
Yeah. FSV?
Yeah. Yeah, is that what it was? I can't. No, not our company. It was another organization, trade association, and it didn't.
Fantasy Sports Ventures, FSV.
Oh, no, that was our company. That was the company I sold to. The trade association was called Fantasy Sports Gaming or something. I can't remember. But Fantasy Sports Ventures. So I sent Andrew there, and I said, look, your job is obviously to do what you can for us, typical marketing, but I want you to keep your eyes and ears open and listen to people who are interested in buying. And he came back with 3 potential buyers. And I regret the company we sold to, but I don't regret it. What I mean is, if I could go back and do it again, I would. But you can't have regrets when you make a decision. And my decision was we were going to sell at that point, and we would try to grow the company. I remember Brian Gray and what he was doing with Yahoo, and then when he went to report. And I wanted to follow that model, but I was shut down every time. The company we sold it to had no desire to grow the company. Their only desire was to do a short sale, amass all companies, amass all this traffic, but not build an infrastructure. Whereas I wanted to build an infrastructure like Bleacher Report was doing, kind of make some of the smaller companies more legitimate versus just being opinion-based crap that came out every week. And I lost every battle because I sold to the wrong group. I sold to a group. Their only goal was to gather all this up and sell it. But I'm also politically astute, as you know. I've been a political junkie since day one. I'm not an economist by trade, but I follow and understand the economy. And I remember the board meeting. It was 2008, and it was the spring. I said, guys, the winds of change are coming. Well, if you guys don't sell this, we miss our window. So we need to start looking at infrastructure, and I was blown off. And lo and behold, the winds of change came in through the election, and then the regulation, and then the economy went into a downspin. And what angered me, Emo, I was like, look, I'm an average Joe. I'm not a rocket scientist. If I can see this coming, why can't you? And I realized they had no clue on the big picture. So Fantasy Sports Ventures failed. They made a claim, and I had left the company by then. I saw the future, and I walked away. And I proudly submit to you, I set Ryan up with every position I had, the job that would have gone to me over at USA Today once the company dissolved. All that was part of the unsaid goal. So I turned that over to him and walked away. So I was shocked when I read a year later, and I was still, I still had some stock and things like that. When I read that they sold it for $30 million, they did not sell it for $30 million. It was a paper sale. Gannett bought us for pennies on the dollar, as I predicted they would, and it was a bloodbath for everybody who bought stock. Because when you get stock, actually, you have to pay the taxes. It's a stock options that you give your employees so they don't get hammered with that. So there were people who lost money on that, and it was a disgrace because I saw what became and what Bleacher Report now is, and I view that you guys are morons. And a little bit of inside baseball. One of the reasons I walked is, and this is a manhood, I don't care if you're a man, woman, when I say you got to grow a pair of cojones, I was starting to get burnout emo, fielding phone calls from the general managers of some of the larger companies we bought, as well as some of the VPs, because I was on the board. I was the only working class guy on the board. I refused to sell KFFL without being on the board. And the reason I did that was two. I wanted to know everything that was happening. And if they did something that was not board approved, that was, a lot of money or big issues, I knew I could get them legally. Everything we had worked towards the stride. So I would get all these phone calls. They would just be complaining left to right, complain about this, complain about that, about that. It got to the point I'd look on the phone and just hit, I cannot cancel the call, but send it the message. And so finally I realized, okay, guys, after stressing out, going nuts, seeing how things weren't working as they should, I contacted all these people, about 7 of them, and not one of them had a pair of cojones. All they wanted to do was bitch and complain. In fact, one guy said, well, William, I got a wife and kids. I go, so all this change you're talking about, everything you want to see me, you want me to risk and put my neck on the line, and nothing happens to you. And I didn't say it back to them like that, but that's what was going through my head. And that's when I told the wife, screw these people, I'm out of here. This is doomed to fail. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Piss poor leadership, overpaying, the corporate office, stock options, feeding each other. And I'm like, hey, you guys are going to be rich on paper. We sell it, but we're not going to sell it because you've done nothing to build the actual company up. So I view that as a bitter lesson in life that I have a lot of takeaways from and repeat. And that's how I think every entrepreneur has to look at it. Whenever you take a couple steps back, you've got to learn from that. But that said, my only regret is I would redo that over. But I have no regrets because at the time, you've got to move forward and make that decision to the best of your ability, if that makes sense to people out there.
Yeah. Did you guys ever get into any other sport other than football?
Oh my gosh, yes. That was part of the goal before I sold. In fact, when we sold, I'm going to say 2006. By 2008, I had a strategic goal to be doing every sport. So when I sold the company, we we were doing baseball, and here's a fun story, and it shows how powerful we were in our ability to adapt and to get quality content out there. The parent company who bought us nabbed NASCAR in some form or fashion, and they were saying, well, yeah, we'll work with you guys, but you guys don't even do NASCAR content. So they came to us, and the kicker about this is what's devious about when I sold the company. This is how desperate they wanted us, that when we sold the company, I still had 100% control of KFFL. In our contract, they could not tell us what to do. We were still our own boss. And they were for us, like, just keep doing what you're doing. But they didn't realize they couldn't come in and say, you have to do NASCAR. So they had to come in and ask us to do NASCAR. And then we had 30 days to get everything up. We had to have content. We had to have rankings. We had to have a NASCAR section. I looked at our guys, because I brought them all in there whispering, don't say a damn word. I wanted them to hear what was happening. And then I go, let me think about if we could do that. And I'm looking at them. They're all nodding their heads yes. And in 30 days, we created a website, content, rankings, and they weren't crap. It was all quality. 6 days after that, we got a letter from NASCAR talking about and praising us. It's like, we can't believe you guys did this in the quality of your content. So that's how good we were in terms of being able to get good quality content. Another one that you may relate to is a magazine. There was a magazine out there, Tucker Smith or something. I don't know if you remember the name. He would do his own magazine. And one day he came to us, guys, all our content people have dropped out. And I said, well, how much time do we got? You got a week to get us our content. I said, done. And he that, when you go back again and you look back, and it's like, maybe I shouldn't have said it that quickly. But all we did was repurpose our content. What I mean is we had all the data. We had, say, our player news write-up on this player. When the magazines, you had the player, that little paragraph write-up. All we did was reword that. Because it was the same data. So all we did was kind of like, we plagiarized our own content, for lack of a better word.
You rewrote it. You were reading.
Yeah, exactly. So we were able to pump out of magazines 70% of its content, because about 30% was from other companies. But we had the hard part, the player knew the statistics, the data, all that. And we were like in the military, and that's what helped our company. I was from the military. I had gone through a lot of crap in the military that helped me realize, if you want to succeed, there is no. We're gonna get it done. So we were around the clock. We were sleeping in the office. I was rotating guys out. The guys would tell me, "No, I still got a couple hours." No, sleep. So it was a machine, and we were able to do things of that nature. Yeah, and we had just gotten a new hire. He'd been there less than a month, and God bless his heart. He was a trooper. He grounded out, but he gave us notice a week later, guys, he's like, you guys, you're there for me, but I just cannot handle this,
What was his name?
Oh, I don't want to say his name, but because he's a class guy. But he left the industry. He was a super nice guy.
Is he still in the business? Is he still in the industry?
Oh, no. He went to a different company, a TV company, a satellite company.
Cool.
And God bless his heart, about 5 years ago when I was doing a pilot for the fantasy, when we did that pilot, remember the pilot? Was that about 5 years ago now, maybe?
Yeah, probably longer.
Yeah, he actually gave us access to a person. The downside, the person was the person whose job was listen to what they say and then tell them no. But bless his heart, he got us in there.
Wow.
So going back to the sale of the company, I knew we had to sell it because these companies and their economies of scale and how much we were grinding. And so we sold it with the hopes to turn it into, I always mispronounce this word, but it's how to say it, behemoth. We wanted it to become a behemoth. And it had the potential, but because of bad leadership, bad management, fools I dealt with. And I say this in this way. As most people know, I am politically active. And what you see one side who talks about the stereotypical Wall Street people, the people who just care about making money. They don't care about building this, doing that, off the backs of others. The group I sold it to, that's kind of who and what they were. And maybe I'll get some pushback, but I always welcome the pushback because, as you knew, they kind of did not like me because I was the one person who would get in their face. I flew from California to New York to demand my guys get the raises they were promised. Because when I'm in their face, what are they going to say? They're not going to say no, but over the phone, they make every excuse. So I was always an in-your-face guy because I truly believe the value of everybody who worked for us and the value of what we were doing for the industry and the entertainment.
Well, that's great stories. And I also want to remind Scott Higgins, who's passed away. I don't know if he passed away, if you knew that.
Yes, he did.
God bless him.
It was sad.
He was great, and he was a great guy, and really sad to see him go at an earlier age than you'd expect. But, yeah, he did a lot of things. He was a unique guy.
He was like our cheerleader. He was like the company. He belongs in the Hall of Fame, and I'm sure he's not. He may not have done anything in terms of building this company, building that company, but he was a powerful figure who kept our hopes, kept our dreams. He was like that coach, and it's one of those, what's the word? Tangible, those intangibles that you don't see on paper, but he belongs in there. So I do believe that over the last 10 years it has become cliquish, and those are some of my friends on there, and they also know me. Yeah, William, he'll tell you that if that's what he believes, that's what he believes. But they're not bad people, And I do remember once somebody got in, and then, well, this guy should be in because he was my partner. And a year later, that guy's in. And that kind of irked me because I'm like, well, there's a lot of people who've done just as much as your partner and you that you guys don't even consider. And you've let other people in who haven't contributed as much. And to me, that's an eyesore because, again, in my political beliefs, one of the biggest things I always harp to people is you can never forget history. If you forget history, you will repeat it. And and human civilization since the dawn of time has a bad issue of ignoring and not remembering history, and we tend to just repeat it over and over and over. And I think, and I'm not talking about myself or Ryan or Higgins or those people. I'm talking about the people before us. In fact, I got a book over here. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, here's one right here. Where's it at? Oh my gosh. Oh, there it is. The Fantasy Football Guide. That was our Bible. Remember that in stats. And nobody talks about
what year is that?
Corch. This was 1998. Nobody talks about the Corch were two brothers, and one of them is infamous for child pornography. But his brother carried on his name. So we've forgotten that people. Who was the guy out of Minnesota who had some of the first magazines, or Jack Pullman,
Pullman and Cliff Charpentier is who you're thinking of.
Charpentier, that's it. Those people are not in the Hall of Fame, and they're the ones who started it, and they belong in the Hall of Fame. And the reason I'm bringing that up is the legacy of this industry. People have forgotten it. Now when they think fantasy, at least in a layman term, from what I see here, it's daily fantasy, Yeah. And it's kind of sad to forget the history. And there's a lot of people still involved who remember that. So I'm a little disappointed in the fact that they have forgotten some of these names. But that said, the Rick Wolfs, the Glenn Coltons, the Emo Cadlicks, the Bob Harrises, and those are the people who we always had our arguments back and forth, but man, we give each other a hug. It's always great to see one another. And here's the other thing I'm proud of, Emo. There's a couple of bigwigs out there who have their jobs because of me. Not that I was the reason they got the jobs, but I helped convince them, dude, take the shot. What have you got to lose? You're not happy here, this, that. And I'm extremely proud of that, because like a Papa Bear looking at people who I help mentor or give guidance to see them to this day still prospering in some of these roles, that's what makes me feel happy about my contribution. So I'm more happy with my contributing to the industry. I am more happy at where some people have wound up at versus what I actually did, and going back to your tale of Chicago real quick, it was, I'll just give you my quick version. You're right. It was a preseason game. We were just in the regular stand, and Chris Spielman was sitting below us, and Adam recognized him. And my first take was, why is the general manager of the Miami Dolphins sitting in this public section here with us? And then Adam is always protective of his sources. So we went up to him, spoke to him, and Adam's just talking. And he's not introducing us. God bless his heart, Adam, And finally, he gives us this look of pity. And then he goes, hey, this is Emo Cadlick. He publishes fantasy magazines. And you guys were given the polite handshake. And then, are you there, Emo?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello. Okay, and then get a polite handshake, and then I said, I'm William Del Pilar, I'm with KFFL. I didn't even finish saying KFFL, and he just screamed out, hot off the wire. And he and literally every other general manager thought we were insiders, but again, we were just grinding every newspaper we covered, find a few paragraphs, talking to the beat reporters. So we were starting to get the news, and we were posting it regardless before the newspapers were posting it. And we developed a professional relationship. He always took our calls. He was always kind to us. But the fun part for some of these entrepreneurs out there is my first Senior Bowl. We got the interview because everybody, what you see today, the Combine, the Senior Bowl, whatever bowl it is, when we started this industry, in there. And there was none of that fanfare. There were none of these individuals out there. We launched. I remember when the players would come out for after practice interviews from the Senior Bowl, reporters there. That was it. And we're like, we jumped to the front. We asked our questions, and then we were doing one-on-one interviews with these players. And I'll never forget Carson Palmer. The man is, was, and will always be a class act. And I remember going, hey, Carson. And I kind of leaned in, whispering, want anybody here? How's it feel to be the $40 million man? And he kind of unabashedly kind of looked at us. He gave us his spiel, but he was smiling the whole time with, I'm giving you this answer, but I'm on cloud 9, you know? And so that was the fun part. And we were seen as the media. And I remember, here's another fun story for some of you guys. I can say I infamously shut down a combine press conference given by Denny Green. And it's a lesson in life. I don't know if you remember, but it was a combine. Denny Green had just been hired by the Arizona Cardinals. People were asking questions. I raised my hand and I said, Coach Green, you know, you had some great seasons in Minnesota, but you weren't able to get that Super Bowl ring, falling one game short there in your undefeated season. There was some turmoil. I go, what have you learned from those lessons that you can take to you with the Arizona Cardinals that has changed you into getting you over the hump? And then he went off. I'm a grown man. I don't need nobody to tell me. Blah, 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 blah. And then he just stormed off. And I remember people looking at me. It's like, who's this jerk? It's just a question, you know? And I wrote an article and I said, Denny Green is a failure and will always be a failure. And no matter how old you are in life, if you cannot look back at where you failed at. When I say fail, I don't mean you were a failure. I just mean you failed to attain the ultimate goal. Because Denny Green was not a failure in Minnesota. He had many winning seasons, Hall of Fame players. He succeeded, but he failed at getting to the Super Bowl, which is every coach's ultimatum. And so what happened to him in Arizona, to me, was a byproduct of Denny Green refusing to learn how to better himself as a human being, and from that translating into his coaching. And that's not fantasy. That's life in general. And that's an important lesson that we all must learn from. If we don't, we're going to stop growing. And I don't care if you're like us in our 50s now, I still grow every day. It's kind of tough because I get angry at myself when somebody who's younger and I learn from that person because I'm like, man, I should have known that. Or like, who's this young punk to teach me? But you have to grudgingly accept that. And that's what makes a good manager and a good leader. More importantly, a good leader.
Yeah. Oh, great stories. Any other things you can think about that you'd like to share?
Oh my gosh, Emo, I could have you here for another hour and a half. I feel like a kid who peaked in high school as a wrestling or football star or something and is getting back together with the high school kids. You know, these stories, there's so many of them. But what I tell people is follow the data when you're doing your rankings. You cannot put any bias. And take that lesson of fantasy sports about objectivity and not having a bias and implement that into every facet of your life. And it's for one lesson for entrepreneurs that I tell you, because you're thrust into a leadership position early in the company because you're entrepreneurs. And within 5 years, you're going to be running things at a different level. When you run into problems with the new employees you hire, and this isn't just fantasy, but anywhere in life, again, never judge that person based on where you're at today. Always remember where you were mentally, emotionally, and physically at that person's point in life, and try to understand why they failed, why they succeeded or whatnot, and then to help teach that person to grow. Because again, one of the things I'm most proud of is where my people have gone since KFFL. And that to me is one of the most important lessons. And there is no easy way. There is no easy day in the fantasy sports industry because it's a niche industry. There's only a handful of jobs. And finally, Emo, I want to make a statement that I do own dailyfantasy.com. I have just been speaking to 2 individuals and we're going to launch that. It's not going to be a gaming site. It's not going to be a content site. It's going to be a daily site where we bring you the best content, fantasy content on the internet to make it a one-stop shop as I refamiliarize myself with the industry, and we'll see where it goes. But I've been offered a lot of money, the high 5 figures so far, but that URL, dailyfantasy.com, is a great URL from a business perspective, and I expect to make my re-entrance into the industry here this year. And on top of that, as you know, our good friend John T. Gorgopoulos, I always mispronounce, but JTG, he's another individual who was a pioneer, but he wasn't part of the clique, so he's not in the industry. But I purchased his domains when he gave them up some years ago. Fantasy, football grumblings, you know. So I'm actually
Gridiron grumblings is what it was.
There you go. So I have that, Gridiron Grumblings, and a few other grumbling sites. And I am a political person, and I'm going to mix sports and politics because that's where my passion is. I was born and raised in that third world country. As individuals can see, you see me, you see a white man. I make no denial of that. My grandmother was black. My great-grandfather's Chinese. My mother has indigenous Chinese and black in her. I take politics seriously, and I hate the divisiveness that's happening out there. If I remember correctly, Emo, we used to talk about this because you're in a mixed marriage yourself, and we're in situations where I can't speak for you. I apologize. But I'm in a situation where I'm like, today's politics is attempting to divide my family. So I am heavy into the political world now. I am an elected official here in my small community. I'm involved with local politics. I'm actually getting ready to launch a nonprofit. So I have, in being stupid to be when I was young, or naive is a better way, I got 3 projects that are getting ready to launch, ironically, at about the same time. So I am getting ready to re-enter the grind of the workforce. And maybe I'll be knocking at your door. Evo, you got an article for me to write. Who knows? But
well, that's
I truly appreciate this call.
Yeah, it's been great. You definitely are a pioneer of fantasy sports. I'm so glad we got into it. The video is not perfect, but I think people really enjoy it. And good luck with all the 3 ventures, including dailyfantasy.com. That's fantastic. Congratulations.
I appreciate it, Emo. And to everybody out there, much love. We are dinosaurs. We are getting old, but it's important for you to know the history of this industry to help guide it down a path where we don't get overregulated to the greed and corruption of what happens with gambling. And so we have to keep a strong vigil on that. But hey, let the industry continue its growth. I'm all for it.
Wonderful.